This is No Talking in the Library, Mentor Public Library's media podcast where we talk about movies, TV, comic books, pretty much anything we find interesting.
We're coming at you live from Weekend at Party Pier, featuring Captain Geach and the Shrimp Shack Shooters. But really, we're talking today about the 1996 movie That Thing You Do, directed and written by Tom Hanks. And this is a movie that I think we both like a lot, so it's going to be a discussion today of a positive discussion, a discussion of something that we really enjoy.
Right, yeah, I feel like we spent a lot of time in other episodes sort of hammering on things, which is fine. I mean, part of the fun of this is
Hating on things.
Right, hating on things that are bad. But That Thing You Do is a movie I think, I know that we both really enjoyed, and we thought we would sort of talk a little bit about why it was that was the case and what it is that makes a movie like this something that you would want to watch. So That Thing You Do is about a band who come together in the summer of 1964 in Erie, Pennsylvania. They're called The Wonders, although they kind of goofily spell their name Oneders, which leads them to be frequently referred to as the Oneaters, which is really pretty hilarious,
actually. A really great recurring joke through the beginning of the movie.
Right. They are going to play a sort of talent show, and it turns out that their drummer breaks his arm attempting to vault over a parking meter, yes. And so they know this other guy who's a drummer, and his name's Guy Patterson, it's played by Tom Everett Scott. They bring him into the band, and they're rehearsing the new ballad that the main guy, Jimmy, has written. And Guy decides that it's too slow, so he picks up the pace, and they end up writing this incredible hit that people really love. And it's basically the story of how they go from just sort of playing in their garage to talent shows, to playing in bars, to playing county fairs, to all the way to going to Hollywood in the space of a summer, which seems kind of unrealistic, but that's the kind of thing that actually happened in the music business in those days. I mean, the business was so hit hungry that it was not unheard of for a band just to get rocketed to fame on the basis of one song. I mean, the one-hit wonder is a thing in American culture, and that's sort of why. But this is a story of the changes that they go through. They eventually get hooked up with Tom Hanks as their manager, who sort of guides them through the kind of upper ranges of becoming famous. It's not quite a coming-of-age story, but it's a story about what happens when people get interested in your art and the sort of changes that happen when you go from just sort of kind of small-town environment to being in the big city media. And it's a story about the people, too. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about this movie, one of the things that I really love about it is you get these it's kind of a study of what the guys are all about and what it is that they're looking to get from this and the sort of funny relationships they have with each other. I mean, it's a very, I hesitate to use the word heartwarming movie, but that's in a lot of respects what it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to do this for everything we talk about, but I really encourage you, if you're listening to this and you have not seen That Thing You Do, just pause it right now. I'll give you a time to do it right now. Pause it and go watch this movie. You will not regret it. This movie is amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to like about this movie. I mean, it's got a kind of freshness to it. It moves along pretty quickly. There's no sort of huge downers in it.
There's no villain.
Right.
That's one of the things. One of the first times I watched it, I was waiting for the betrayal or the evil record label or something, and that just doesn't happen.
Right, that's exactly right. As I was rewatching it the other night, I was remembering when I saw it the first time, thinking, okay, when are they going to get jammed by somebody, or when are they going to get in a fight with each other, or what's the sort of central conflict going to be? When is Charlize Theron going to come back? I mean, there's a really funny sort of thing in the beginning of this movie. So Guy, the person who becomes their drummer, and he's sort of the central character in the story. At the beginning is dating Charlize Theron. I think we discovered that this was actually Charlize Theron's first or second movie role. And it kind of goes nowhere. And at a certain point they go on tour, and she is in her dentist's office, and her dentist comes out with sort of like perfect hair and perfect teeth. And that's it. It's sort of mentioned later in the movie that she
ran off with her dentist.
But they don't do much to kind of develop the relationship. It's just sort of, it's there and it's gone. While we're talking about why it is that we like this movie, I guess the question that really raised itself to me, it's funny that we sort of came to this, I don't know why we were talking about it originally.
It was just the last week or two, the cast members of The Wonders reunited for some event in California, and they played their hit song, That Thing You Do, and that got us started talking about the movie.
Right. Also, Jonathan Demme was a producer on this movie, and he is recently deceased, if I'm recalling correctly. I was a little surprised. I don't know why I'm surprised by anything you tell me anymore, but I was a little surprised when we first started talking about it that this was a movie that you really liked. And the reason gets back to how you, and I think this is true of me too, need to sort of find a way into a movie, need to sort of find a way that a movie is relevant to yourself. And there's only one real female character in this movie, Faye, who's played by Liv Tyler.
Played by, like, peak Liv Tyler, like, right in the middle of Empire Records and inventing the Abbotts before she gets sucked into the Lord of the Rings nonsense.
Right, exactly. Like, the sort of, in the sort of freshness of her 15 minutes of fame. And she's an important character, for sure, but she's the only female character, really, you know, with the exception of Charlize Theron for a few minutes at the beginning. So my question to you really is, what's your way into this movie?
So I like this movie, and first of all, this movie's hilarious. Anyone will like this movie because
it is really funny.
It's so quotable. Every line Steve Zahn says.
Yeah, he's like, every line Steve Zahn says is like a one-line zinger that you can sort of repeat to people. You repeat it to people who've seen the movie and they know exactly what you mean.
Gotta be quick, I'm from Erie, PA is one that I use a lot.
You gotta be quick with me. I'm from Erie, PA.
But the reason, like, my love of this movie is really tied up with my relationship with my father because he really loves this movie. So my dad's a musician, and by the time I was around and growing up, he wasn't doing music full-time anymore. He was at one point like a professional full-time musician. Growing up, he did it mostly, you know, on the side and on weekends and stuff, but I grew up with that sort of world, so I spent a lot of time with him. Like, our garage is basically his rehearsal studio, tons of guitars in the garage. I spent a lot of weekends with him playing these small-time gigs, so a lot of carnivals and county fairs and that kind of thing. I, spent a lot of time helping him restring guitars and setting up his pedal steel or carrying amps around and that kind of thing. So for a large part of this movie, the Wonders are doing the same sort of small-time musician thing. So they play at Mercyhurst College, and they're playing the state fairs and stuff. And that's such a weirdly relatable situation.
Right, yeah, I can see how that would have a real sort of familiar feeling to you.
Yeah, so that is one of the things. So, like, I don't have the same feeling, like, when I watched Almost Famous or something. Like,
right.
He wasn't playing in a rock and roll band, taking drugs and jumping off of roofs. I don't know what he did before I was born, maybe.
Right, but probably best not to get into that, all things considered. Is there, there's a Pennsylvania dimension to this movie, too, and
yes,
you're a big Pennsyltucky sort of
yes,
person.
I'm from the Pennsyltucky part of Pennsylvania. This movie it starts as having taken place in Erie, Pennsylvania, so that's...
Back when there were jobs in Erie.
That's kind of funny as well. But that, for me, is how... I mean, that's how I saw it. I think my dad was watching it. This movie used to run on, ABC Family or whatever.
Right. I think I saw it probably, 6 or 8 times in the space of 6 months just because it was on and I was too tired to change the channel.
Right. So it was something that we could enjoy, and it was also something that we find relatable. And he finds it relatable for different reasons. I was just talking to him about this. The wish fulfillment of being a musician to have that hit song that changes everything is something that everyone who's a musician dreams of. So that's sort of what this movie encapsulates.
Yeah, there's that really beautiful moment in the talent show scene in the beginning where all of a sudden, in the course of them playing the song, which is almost a disaster anyway, because, I mean, I can tell you, I've played in a lot of bands, we can get in this a little bit later, but if the drummer unannouncedly changes the speed at which the song is going to go, like, that's a very alarming thing for those of us further forward in the band, but it works. And in the course of playing the song, the whole sort of crowd in the place realizes that something interesting is happening, and they get this really super positive response from people. And that's something that it's so rare. I mean, very rare in my experience. Maybe it's because I played in mostly pretty awful bands. But there's that sort of moment when you actually have a kind of connection with the audience, and it makes all the really boring, unpleasant stuff about being in a band kind of worthwhile, like all the toting and all the boring rehearsals and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, in that same scene when they're playing the talent contest and the song is sped up, but everyone really likes it, Lenny, the guitarist, sort of turns to Guy, and he's like, "What's going on here?" And Guy just sort of smiles, and they all know that they have just hit upon something magical.
Right. There's one of the things that I really liked about this is I kept, as we were talking about earlier, I kept sort of waiting for serious friction. And one of the things about which I expected there to be friction was when you write a song, a lot of times, if someone else in the band wants to change something fundamental about it, it's kind of hard. And even if it's obviously an improvement, but Jimmy gets with it pretty quickly, and he doesn't get hung up on, oh, Guy is changing my song. He's looking out at the audience and seeing them do the swim and, you know, dancing around, and he understands this is the song is bigger than us, you know, even at the very beginning, and it's really cool because he has the sort of news to recognize in the moment what the power of getting this right is, and that really changes the equation for them for the entire rest of the movie.
So talking about the song, they have their hit song, That Thing You Do, but what is even better about this movie and this everything about it is that the whole soundtrack is great. And the Wonders have a couple of different songs that they play throughout the movie, and they're all great. And there's also songs to sort of set the 1960s sort of feel of the movie. There's like the girl group, Chanterlene's in the band. There's like the cheesy lounge singer guy. There's the crooning songstress of Diane Dane. They get on a tour with these other Playtone. Playtone is the record label that they sign with Tom Hanks's character. And so you get to see these other artists, and you can almost identify like what each one of these people are parodying.
Right, exactly.
And but it's all great. And just to sort of transition here about the soundtrack, unless you wanted to say something else about...
We can come back.
Okay, we'll just come back. So the other fun thing about the soundtrack and the song, specifically the That Thing You Do song, is that it's written by a member of the band Fountains of Wayne, Adam Schlesinger. And you might recognize Fountains of Wayne as being the purveyors of the kitsch song, 2003 song, Stacy's Mom.
Right, that was how I immediately remembered them. Not that I was had that on my MP3 player or anything, but there you go.
You know that song. Everybody knows that song.
Well, it was on like a Chrysler commercial or something like that too.
Yeah, it played on the radio, I think, consistently through that year.
Right. But
first of all, Adam Schlesinger sort of made a career of writing like music for like fake bands and stuff.
Yeah. He had that sort of way, and he has a kind of similar writing ability to the guys from They Might Be Giants or Bare Naked Ladies, where he can write in a lot of styles, and he really sort of understands something about the different styles that he writes in, and can thus write songs that really sound right. And this is the great thing about That Thing You Do, which I think hit like number 18 in the pop charts in the summer of '96 when this movie was released. It doesn't sound anachronistic. It sounds like it could have been released in 1964, but it's got that really infectious melody, and it's not too long. It doesn't have parts that are that don't belong in a song like that. It's just a very compact, mid 1960s pop song, and he does it just absolutely perfectly.
And the movie uses the song perfectly. They don't play it so much that you're sick of hearing it by the time the movie's over. Like, I think there's a feeling that you want to play your hit song, but they play it all the way through once at the beginning, and then you'll hear parts of it throughout the middle, and then you hear it again at the very end when the Wonders are doing their fake Ed Sullivan television performance.
Right.
On the Hollywood Television Showcase, I think.
Right, I think that's what it is. The kind of interesting way that they use it is that they sort of play it in each moment when they've kind of gone up a level. So they play it at the talent show, and then they play it in the bar. By the way, okay, I'm just going to say this right now. I love this movie, and what I'm about to say is not really meant to be critical. It's just I've been in a lot of bands, in a lot of bars, and there's a few unrealistic things I would like to point out. Number one, the bar owner offers them extra money. This never ever happens. Generally, the bar owner will tell you that there is no money. Maybe you'd like to be paid with a couple of beers. Please get out of my establishment.
Those weren't dollar bills. Those were presidential flashcards.
Well, that's right. That's exact. I mean, you'd be much more likely to pay them in that, I can just tell you. Number two, Guy Patterson is a decently quality drummer. As a matter of fact, he's very good, but he's at least decently skilled. Floating around, not playing in a band. And let me just tell you, drummers are in so short supply. The thing about the drummer is, I will just tell you about being in a band, a good drummer will not make your band, but a bad drummer will destroy it. And you're really, as a band, only as good as your drummer is. Like, any monkey can play guitar, and I can tell you this as a guitar player. Like, how many guitar players does it take to screw in a light bulb?
I don't know.
101. One to screw it in, and about 100 to stand around going, I could have done that. It's really like, but a drummer, it's really hard to find good drummers. So the fact that he's just hanging around and they haven't kicked this other guy out, I don't care how good of friends they are with him, and brought him in as a drummer, I mean, it's just grossly unrealistic to me. But but to get back to the song, like they at sort of each level, they play it to kind of show you, like, okay, now we're up the level. Like, now this is what it looks like when you really get a great response at this, at the fair level. And
when there's like go-go dancers like behind them,
right,
and they're wearing like the matching suits.
Right, and you keep expecting them. You keep worrying that they're going to sort of get this, that there's going to be more tension, that it's going to be, they're going to sort of realize, oh God, this is meaningless. I want to, because Guy wants to go play jazz, or he loves jazz. And you keep thinking, well, the sort of underlying conflict in this story is going to be he decides that the Wonders are just not artistically rewarding for him, and he can quit. But that's not what happens. And in fact, like, he gets his sort of jazz thing on, but it's only once the Wonders have gone their way.
Well, okay, so since you're sort of touching here on the ending, the movie ends when they do have sort of a band conflict where Jimmy's mindset through this whole movie is recording and writing new songs. He's this sort of genius songwriter.
And that's a really, it's an interesting conflict to have. It's very unusual, and it's very realistic. Like, once you understand a little bit about the music business, what you come to realize is, when you're in that short window where they care about you, you need to get into the studio and track some things because their attention span is super short, and that thing you do is only going to last a few more plays, so you need to get something else tracked to keep them interested in what you're doing.
So the band breaks up, and that's kind of where the movie ends. And it does that sort of title card thing during the credits that tells you where each of the band members ends up. And Guy, as John just mentioned, plays jazz in LA before starting like a conservatory or something where he teaches it.
Bainbridge Island, Bainbridge Island is a sort of very rich suburb of Seattle, which is kind of interesting that he would go there. Like, why of all? I mean, I can think of maybe why wouldn't you just stay in LA where like the jazz musicians are? But what do I know?
And Jimmy actually forms another band called the Herdsmen, which is a callback to like one of the funniest scenes of the movie where they're trying to decide what to name the band, and Jimmy's like, I keep coming back to the Herdsmen, Jimmy and the Herdsmen. Right. And so apparently the Herdsmen is Jimmy's band that records a bunch of gold records for Playtone, so he gets what he wants. And then the bass player character joined the Marines, which is what he was planning on doing throughout the movie, and Steve Zahn's character is doing something in a casino.
Right, he's a casino manager. The funny thing about the bass player character is I hadn't really noticed this until I was reading a little something about the movie. I was reading up on it on IMDb, and he's never named. Like he's just the bass player, and he actually, the guy who played the bass player, whose name was Ethan Embry, kind of made a joke about it that his name was really Tobias, which shortened to TB, and then they just made it the bass player or whatever. But it's kind of funny that it's a kind of musician in-joke about,
nobody cares about the bass player.
Right, yeah. What do you call the third best guitar player in the band? The bass player.
But that's why I love the end of this movie, and I love the whole movie, but I really like that although the fight with Jimmy and Mr. White is kind of what ends the band, he's not villainized for wanting to be serious about his music.
Right.
And Guy isn't, villainized for just wanting to noodle around playing jazz in clubs or teaching or anything like that. And I really, really appreciate the idea that people can have different levels of interest in something, like for music, since we're talking about this. Like, think about Whiplash.
Right.
That's a movie about a drummer, and the music almost destroys his life.
Right.
But, the idea that Guy can be happy just playing for fun or playing for enjoyment is really, really nice and really satisfying for me. Because, I'm not a musician, but, I have other hobbies that I do for fun, like writing. And sure, I dream about being, a best-selling novelist, but ultimately, just doing it for fun is enough. And my dad, for example, I'm sure he wishes that he, had a hit record or is still a big musical superstar, if only so that he didn't have to work his job.
Right.
But I'm sure he doesn't, he's not unhappy with, what his life is like now. And I really like that the end of the movie is here are the different ways one can engage with music, and nothing about, nobody is wrong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I at a certain point stopped being in bands, and certainly I miss it. And there's a part of me that wishes I had done more with it. But I also sit around playing guitar, and I write songs that I like. And just for anybody listening, if anybody's interested in the kinds of things that we talk about when we're have some free time, we both are kind of writing hobbyists. And we were talking about this the other day. I was talking to someone, and they were saying, I was talking about writing, and they were saying, well, don't you realize it's very unlikely that you'll ever write something that anyone will ever read? And I was thinking to myself, why do I care about that? I do it because I enjoy it, not because I want to be Stephen King, and not because I care really if anybody reads it. And that's, another way that you can relate to it. And that's, I think, something that I too really like about this movie, that they're not these kind of crazy obsessives about it. I mean, Jimmy has a very, I think, reasonable approach to it. I want to be serious about it. If we're going to do this, let's, get in the studio and record some tracks. Let's write some new music, because we're only as good as the most recent thing that we've written. But it's not where the other guys are at, and that's fine too.
He's alone in his principles.
Right. Yeah, really alone, because part of his principles involving is apparently dumping Faye, his girlfriend. And so there's another interesting thing about this movie. So if you get the DVD.
Oh, yeah, this is interesting. It was the 10th anniversary.
Right. The 10th anniversary DVD comes with a second DVD that has a bunch of other stuff on it that, this sort of normal, featurettes and stuff like that. But the first DVD has the theatrical release, but it also has the uncut release, or the uncut version. And it's a really interesting case study in how film editing is done and why. Because
the director's cut version is a worse movie than the theatrical release.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's this whole... So, if you watch the movie, the relationship between Guy and Charlize Theron seems really compressed. I mean, there doesn't seem to be very much of it. She sort of disapproves of him when they're at that talent show. You sort of wonder why they're together. And then she runs off with her dentist, and that's it. And when you watch the director's cut, you realize there's a whole bunch. They cut 3/4 of Charlize Theron out of this movie. And it's funny because, I mean, so it works better that way. They also moved the dentist scene, so it's in the theatrical release, it's after the talent show, but it's before the talent show in the director's cut. But what's really interesting is there's this sort of scene where they kind of talk about their relationship and they're hanging out, and they're watching the movie Spartacus, the Lloyd Bridges 1960 movie about the Roman slave rebellion. Guy has this tagline, "I am Spartacus," that he repeats throughout the movie, but they cut that scene out. And so he's like saying this "I am Spartacus" line throughout the rest of the movie, and you never know, like, why is this a thing for him? But it was so ingrained into the movie, the rest of the movie that they shot, that they couldn't cut it out. You're just like, "I am Spartacus." I mean, to the point that at the end, when he's sitting around noodling around on the drums in the studio, and the jazz guy comes up and asks him what it's called. I mean, I don't really think that drummers have songs, but whatever. He says, "I am Spartacus," and that sort of like brings it around, except that the beginning thing is not there, so you have no idea why, Because I think that if the "I am Spartacus" scene with Charlize Theron in the beginning of the movie is still there, then you get a kind of a sort of full circle effect. Like the "I am Spartacus" thing transfers from his relationship to her, which is in a weird way sort of metaphorical of his home life, to now he's off doing jazz in this sort of like new life that he's going to have.
Yeah, but it's not in the theatrical version, and it still works because without the sort of anchoring sequence of him watching the movie, like you can kind of like make the mental leap. Like "I am Spartacus" is not like that obscure of a reference, so you're like, oh, okay, like he must just, this is his catchphrase, like I don't know.
Right, yeah, it's not it's not
detrimental to like lose that scene, and they cut out like, it's just the movie, the theatrical release of the movie is really one of the best paced movies that I can think of. There's never a point where you're like, man, I really wish this scene would end, or the movie's good, but it takes a half an hour to get into it, or the movie's good, but the end drags. No, like this movie just sort of, you just get on and go, and you get off when the movie ends. Like there's no like dragging points.
Right. I mean, I completely agree that cutting out this scene was absolutely the right thing to do, and rejigging the sort of order of the scenes. And what you lose from not hearing the origin of the "I'm Spartacus" thing is so much less important than what you gain from making the movie more streamlined. I mean, this is the thing about the movie, and really what you get, why it's sort of, if you're interested in how movies go together, why it's interesting to watch the director's cut, because the movie is so streamlined. You're absolutely right. It's absolutely perfectly paced. Like the scenes aren't too long. That you don't get to the point where you're feeling like, oh, this scene is dragging on, they need to move on to something else. It's just, okay, here's a thing, okay, here's the next thing, okay, here's the next thing. And they don't dawdle around on stuff that you're not really interested in. They just tell the story in a kind of a way that's really refreshing, and a way that moves along toward the end in a way that sort of keeps you engaged. And I think that clearly, I mean, every scene that you look at in the director's cut where you see like they cut it. So for instance, also the scene in the hardware store at the beginning is kind of about a third longer, but they cut away the dead wood, and they were left with, or the scene in the practice, there's a scene in their practice studio where they're playing the song and they're talking about this and that, and they cut out about half of it, and it makes it 1,000 times better. I mean, it's really a much better product because they thoughtfully cut down the stuff that didn't need to be there.
So I think everyone needs to watch this movie. There's nothing in this movie that any person wouldn't enjoy, and I think that it's one of those movies that doesn't necessarily get enough credit, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a fun movie. It's a movie where you can watch it with people who are a little more straight-laced, and you're not going to see they're not going to get freaked out by the horrible rock and roll lifestyle. I mean, it's a movie about four nice guys who have something interesting happen to them. I mean, I really like the fact, by the way, that they don't demonize the Tom Hanks character. Like, he's not one of these sort of grasping Fagin-type music label guys. Like, he really wants to help them, and all the advice that he gives them is good. And that's a sort of refreshing aspect to it.
Yeah, and he's also nice to Liv Tyler's character of Faye, a character who could easily be sort of treated like garbage by either the band or the record label, but that's one of the things that I like about the movie, is that he he asks, who is Faye? Oh, Faye's my girlfriend. He's like, all right, if you want her on tour, she's your costume mistress, and that's it. And then she just becomes, in his mind, part of the band.
Right, exactly. And he doesn't, I mean, that there's a very pronounced gender dynamic in this movie in the sense that the girls are kind of off to the side, but Faye is clearly also important to them in a way that, I mean, she's not quite the fifth member of the group, but she's important to the group as group of human beings. Like, I mean, one of the kind of really lovable things about Guy is that he's always sort of trying to ask, how are things going for you? When there's a sort of long part of the last third of the movie where she's sick, and Guy is always kind of looking after her to try and make sure that she's okay, because he sees her as part of their set, not just sort of a hanger-on in the way that women are a lot of times presented in these kind of very guy-centric rock and roll type movies.
All right.
Well, I think that's all we have for today. In the rest of this month, we're doing female superheroes or something like that, and then we're doing Wonder Woman when the Wonder Woman movie comes out on the 2nd.
Yeah, I think that's going to start in June.
Right.
I don't exactly know what the rest of May, I think, is a secret.
Right. A secret.
Anyway, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
No Talking in the Library is a production of Mentor Public Library. Opinions expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily express those of the library or the library board. You can find our webpage on the library's website at www.mentorpl.org/adults/no-talking. Our sound editor is Marilyn Weiss. Our webpage is maintained by Mary Pelton.